All right, so thank you all for joining, and our deepest apologies for the technical issues that we were having, but it seems that everything is working fine now. On behalf of the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Cultivating Justicia con Amor y Querencia, Embracing Healing Through Policies and Practices that Transform Institutions for Latinx AL Communities. My name is Lucia Gutierrez. I am AAHHE's Executive Director, and I will be assisting you as needed during this session. Please spend a moment to ensure that you have a clean connection. We recommend that you turn off any Wi-Fi connections on your phone or your iPad to ensure a wider bandwidth. After the presentation, our esteemed presenters will enter a period of participation Q&A. If you have any questions, please, we ask you that you submit those questions via the chat. This is a live webinar and it is being recorded. All participants are muted. Thank you to each for attending. Now I will turn the session over to AAHHE Chair, Dr. Victor Sáenz, for his welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. Well, good afternoon or good morning, wherever we might find you across the country. Thank you so much for joining us. And really my job here is just to welcome all of you on behalf of AAHHE, the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education. I'm privileged and honored to serve as the chair of the board this year, serving alongside some outstanding leaders, scholars across the country. And especially excited to be able to welcome our conference co-chairs for the AAHHE 2022 conference. You know, we started in essence planning for the 22 conference as soon as the 21 conference was over last March. And I just want to thank and acknowledge Dr. Nancy Acevedo and Dr. Hermen Diaz III. They have stepped up and in fact been on the job, so to speak, volunteer job, I might add, since March of this year, working diligently to put together an outstanding conference planning committee. Some of those members are here with you all today as part of this webinar. And I'm going to turn over here briefly to Hermen to help introduce everybody. But again, on behalf of the board and our staff as well, Dr. Lucia Gutierrez, we just cannot thank enough the work of the conference planning committee and the countless other volunteers that have worked so hard to get the word out about our 22 conference, to invite proposals, and of course to review those proposals, which that process just completed about a month ago. So this is representing our first official kickoff event for the 2022 conference. So we're really excited. And I'm going to turn it now over to Dr. Hermen Diaz, one of our conference co-chairs. Hermen.
Thank you so much. It's great to be in this space, and thank you everybody for joining in on this conversation. I want to do a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from Buffalo, New York, which is the ancestral and traditional homelands of the Haudenosaunee Alliance, including the Mohawk, Oneana, Onondaga, Cayuga, Tuscarora, and Seneca peoples and nations. It's important to recognize the indigenous peoples and communities as the rightful owners and stewards of this land. And as a guest, I'm grateful to live and work on this land with the indigenous peoples of the past, present, and future. I think, you know, recognizing that we're all joining this conversation from our respective cities, institutions, all of which is built on indigenous land, I think that this acknowledgement really is more a call to action to engage in the conversation, especially as we engage in the conversation around in the work centering Justicia, Amor, and building this kind of idea of a beloved place through the notions of Querencia. And so a couple quick items. Please share your thoughts and communicate with us via social media at AAHHE.org. Also, feel free to utilize the chat function, and the moderators will follow up with the panelists as soon as possible. And please complete the survey that you receive after the webinar to provide feedback, along with provide suggestions for future webinar topics. And so with that, hopefully you're all here because you want to engage in the conversation around the 2022 AAHHE conference that is happening on March 10th through the 11th 2022. We hope that you will join us virtually or in person in Henderson, Nevada, on the great campus of Nevada State College. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm here. I just, for some reason, I'm not able to start my video because the host has stopped it. So, but I'm here and I'm present. So I just want to say good morning to everyone on the West Coast and good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast. I'm Nancy Acevedo. I am Associate Professor at CSU San Bernardino in the Education, Leadership, and Technology Department. And I just want to thank Victor Saenz, Lucia Gutierrez, thank you both so much for your work in the last few years in terms of moving AAHHE toward a different trajectory and making it more inclusive. I really want to thank Herman Diaz for taking the lead and stepping up in over the last year to support us with the development of the conference. There we go. All right, now it works. And just thank you, Herman, because I know it's been a lot of work, a lot of logistical and just thinking through the different ideas. But I'm glad you all are here today. I want to genuinely thank Audrey Baca, Inoa, and Rigoberto Marquéz, and Alonzo Campos should be joining us shortly, who's also having technical issues as well. The blessing and also the challenge, right, with technology. But I want to just take a quick moment to introduce everyone. So if Alonso is able to join us, he is currently a PhD candidate at Claremont Graduate University in the School of Educational Studies, and he was a former AAHHE graduate fellow. Dr. Audrey Baca is committed to teaching and working with students, and she really genuinely hopes to facilitate a stronger higher education pipeline for all students. Currently, she teaches in the transfer level English classes at Miramar College, and she's also a program specialist for us at Cal State San Bernardino. She is part of the Doctorate of Education program, and she is there fostering pathways for our doctoral scholar practitioners. She is a dedicated advocate, and she supports different collaborations with key stakeholders with efforts to increase the educational attainment for historically underserved student populations. We also have Dr. Inoa. Welcome. Dr. Inoa is currently Associate Dean at the College for Living and Wellness at Vassar College. He earned his bachelor's degree in Black Studies from SUNY New Paltz and his master's in Educational and Psychological Development from Boston College, and his PhD in the Educational Policy Leadership Program at the University of Albany at SUNY. His research focuses on the Latinx community and athletics. He is also the creator of English Tongue Latinx Soul and the one-person performance, which uses a combination of storytelling, poetry, music, and photography. At his core, the lessons from his grandmother, his mother, and the generations of Black feminists have stuck with him, so that he can make room at the table for anyone that crosses the threshold of his professional or personal home. So welcome, Dr. Inoa. We have Dr. Rigoberto Marquéz, who is lecturer and associate director of academic programs and community engaged learning for Stanford Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. There at Stanford, he leads the mission and direction of a family of undergraduate programs, graduate programs in comparative studies in race and ethnicity. And he's also the center's, he leads the center's undergraduate and graduate fellowships. So he's doing very important work out there. He is a graduate of the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, where he earned his PhD. And I'm going to now hand it off to Herman, but before I just want to reiterate, thank you all for being present and for being in attendance and for all the work that has been going into this conference over the last few months. We just all genuinely appreciate it. Herman?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. And so to kind of get us kickstarted, I guess, in terms of the conversation around this coming year's conference, the 2022 AAHHE Conference, the conference theme being Cultivating Justicia con Amor y Querencia, embracing healing through policies and practices that transform institutions for Latinx AO communities. And so hopefully today feels like an organic conversation and dialogue to kind of provide some context and perspective that fueled many of the conversations within the conference planning committee. And so the first question that we'll kind of throw out to the panelists to provide some of that context and perspective is around the idea of querencia. And so querencia, before everybody kind of jumps ship in terms of looking at Google and looking to Google for a definition, you might kind of start to see that Google identifies querencia as like a bullfighting term. And so the way in which a bull kind of situates itself within the ring. And so that is not the way in which the committee utilized this term or framed the idea and concept of querencia. And so the Google search might be a little bit of a misguided notion, but we define querencia through a lot of conversations utilizing Arellano's work in 2007 that defined querencia as a place where one feels safe, a place where one's strength and character is drawn, and where one feels at home. And Sovian in 2018 also kind of utilized this term to broaden it to really mean a beloved place, one that informed identity, gave us a sense of belonging in the world, and rooted us in a particular space through memory and experiences. And so this idea of querencia kind of being a place where we know exactly where we are and who we are. And so for many of us, that might be AAHHE, for some that might not be. And so recognizing this kind of peace and reciprocal relationship at play. And so the first question for the committee members and our panelists today is, as a committee, we engaged in and discussed a lot in depth this idea of querencia and specifically this kind of reciprocal relationship of person and place, but reciprocal relationship of person and place through this understanding of care and support. And so how do you see querencia, and how do you hope that conference attendees and or presenters and facilitators might engage with this concept? And so anybody can feel free to jump in at any moment.
I'll start us off. So I had to go Google. We were in that conversation when we were talking about querencia, and I was like, let me go Google. And yeah, we were together like, no, this isn't right. So I'm not a native speaker of Spanish. My family, I'm like third, fourth, maybe generation. My family hails from New Mexico. So it was pretty ironic though, that when they started digging deeper into querencia, that New Mexico is one of the places that it comes up. And so I actually feel that sense of querencia, that home, that belonging, when I go visit my grandma's family. My grandpa's family's from there too. So it's so ironic that I didn't have a term for it, I didn't have a name, but just I can be gone for 5 years and I can go back and it's like I never left. And that's the same type of feeling the first time that I went to AAHHE. And I think that's what's kind of special, is that we're trying to build this sense of querencia within our conference, within the spaces of our conference, and even in the in-betweens throughout the year. So when we're thinking about engaging our conference attendees and in the presenters with this concept of querencia, it's that we're defining it, because I think it already exists, but we have to call it what it is, and we have to make sure that we embrace it and continue it, because there are times, especially this past year, where we felt most removed from others, and we really need this space, particularly as underserved populations, as being the first, as being the other, as being this. We need to feel those spaces and places and cherish them and hold true to them. So that's sort of my hope, and to see that in the roundtables or the symposia and these conversations. I'm looking forward to hearing about how the presenters and select are going to be presenting their own form of querencia, this concept, to others, and be a part of a larger conversation.
Did you want to jump in, friend? Thank you for that, Audrey. Part of the querencia is a term that came up for me maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. I grew up in a very privileged home, and I don't mean that by like financial means. I mean that love was in abundance, right, in my house, from my grandmother, and particularly for my mother, who, like, there was not a day that she did not remind me that she loved me, and that someone in this world cared about me. And as I thought about my work as a Latino identified individual and working with students here, particularly marginalized students as well, I was trying to figure out what it means to transform institutions from ones that were not built for us for ones that can be for us. And love as a concept, amor, like, is not language we typically use. And if you work in particular settings, HR might tell you, be careful, right, around using the word love or amor, right, because of particular connotations around relationships. And so I started to look for different words or in various languages that can communicate love without using the word, right? I still use the word a lot. So, I still use the word love and amor a lot. But querencia became like this particular manifestation of the way that love injects itself into work, right, and my life. And I want to say, maybe just to kind of like be a kind of a devil's advocate with even the bull terminology, right? Like, it's, Spain as a colonizer, right, is bullfighting is a very the bull in this particular arena is the subject, very much the same way that colonies, our particular ancestors were colonized and made subjects as well. And for the bull, right, the terminology in bullfighting is this place where the bull draws strength and kind of safety, a sense of safety. And it's very much in line with what we've already shared about the terminology of querencia, and a sense of what it means to seriously consider its place at our institutions, at our work, with our processes and practices and policies that would transform, again, these institutions from ones that weren't built for us to ones that can be for us. I think it takes a particular kind of collective imagination. Part of what I'm hoping with presenters is to take serious what it means to create, right, an environment in that particular moment where there is not just an offering of connecting with ideas, but an opportunity to connect with one another. I haven't seen folks in this space for a little bit, but when I saw Edmund's face, when I saw Nancy's face, Rigoberto's face, Audrey's face, I was like, this particular kind of relationship exists that I'm hoping conference participants and presenters take seriously around the ways that they can connect with one another even in that moment.
Good morning, everyone. Buenas tardes, depending on where folks are. For me, the term querencia is an embodied act of unconditional love and care towards the other. It's an approach of navigating the tumultuous terrains of higher education while centering healing. And as at AAHHE, we should be a place where students, staff, and faculty feel their identities and difficult lived experiences are affirmed and understood. For me, querencia is a purposeful display of care and support towards another person that makes them feel seen. And for me, querencia kind of manifests in very different ways, but kind of picking up on what Luis was saying, that love and that care that we show and those ideas of home are such an important part of querencia. And in my own spheres, my work really relates to queer Latinx communities, and queer folks, we show so much care towards each other because of the feelings of marginalization and within even our own communities. And so there is this instant kind of kinship that exists, where there is a level of care that is given to one another because we know that we may not be getting care anywhere else. And so for me, Querencia really is a place where we see people for who they are, and we try to bring care to where they are. And love is a big part of that. And for me, the embodiment of Querencia is such an important thing, because someone needs to, within you, be able to see them, if that makes sense. So, Alonso, I see that you kind of come in.
Buenos dias, good afternoon, everybody. I apologize for my technical difficulties. Happens to the best of us. I didn't get to introduce myself, so I'll do that real quick and brief. My name is Alonzo Campos. I'm a doctoral candidate here in Claremont, Southern California, and I'm excited to be part of this group and invited. I think for me, Querencia, you know, just kind of piggybacking on what others have said, really is about, and I do apologize for the sound, there's construction on the roof. I think for me, it's also being intentional, right? We've all gone through, you know, some really challenging times in the last year and a half, almost 2 years. And so for me, I think part of that, the Querencia is the practical part, right? This idea that like we need to be intentional when we really say like, we really care about about you and our students. So I think for me, that's where Querencia stands, and I'm excited to see what it'll produce in this upcoming conference.
Thank you all. And I think the power in having these discussions while we were in the conference committee planning meetings is really processing that Querencia can shift and develop and evolve, right? And so for us, I've been involved with AAHHE since 2011 when I was first a grad fellow, but I think over the last decade, just seeing the shift that has happened, and originally being told, well, go to the programs, go to the grad programs, but don't expect too much critical mindedness outside of the grad program. So I came in with that warning, and just seeing it over the last decade, how this push from within, but also this pull from within by leaders, by different leaders and different individuals who are doing the work within AAHHE to try and foster a different type of space, right? For different types of individuals, for moving away from that traditional, maybe like Chicano mindedness that it was originally centered on. And so I think just acknowledging that Querencia can develop, even if it's not there. And for some of us, we're working toward building it and towards ensuring that it's accessible. And that it is a welcoming space, and that's part of why we've done a lot of the changes in the review process and the call for proposals, and having a committee, right, and asking folks to come and pitch in, do the work, which is time, energy, emotional labor, right? That in itself is aiming to foster the Querencia that we're really appreciative of. Now we have a follow-up or another question that we want us to process and discuss and share with our attendees present and who can hear us after the recording. So given a long and ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and our multiple negotiations living through such, the idea of embracing healing came to the forefront for us, right? For you, what does embracing healing through policies and practices look like in pursuit of transforming institutions, in pursuit of transforming spaces, for those of us and the generations that come after us as well?
I guess I'll go again. Well, we've all experienced this past year. This was our pandemic, 2 years. We've we have a long way to go, because what we thought was normal is not normal. And the practices that we picked up throughout the pandemic have really, it requires healing and embracing healing. And I've did my dissertation research on community colleges, and I mean, I'm working at the doctoral level now, and you could see it on both ends of the spectrum. If I were still in K-12 and I had over a decade in K-12, I would see it there too. That we've realized it, and this is kind of connecting with our justicia concept of justice, is that we see the inequities that have happened and we need to build back from it. I think that the policies and practices for healing and embracing healing, like for my asynchronous 8-week English 101 course, I've been promoting the mental health and wellness centers. I have them embedded in my classes in each of the modules at the end of the week, and I ask them how they're doing and put my link in, I put my phone number in, and I tell them reach out. You know, I've had a number of students say they're just overwhelmed, and they're leaving. They're leaving. So that's something that we need to be aware of, is not just, okay, who do we have in our classrooms, because it's the people that we're losing as well. We have to address that in the healing component. So to be reaching out after our students to tell them like that I'm still here. I'm going to be here when you decide to come back. And I mean, it's falling to professors to say that. I do that with the students that I work with in the doctoral program as a staff member. I've had a number of students this past year say, I can't continue. I have to take care of family. And then I give them my phone number. Well, I'll let you know when you need to apply for the FAFSA for next year. And it's these practices, these small practices that need to be institutionalized. And we need to have the leaders that support these practices to reach out. It's like extending deadlines. It's having grace periods. It's being flexible. And it's all these practices that need to occur in our classrooms, in our spaces, in our environment. And we need to have the leaders supportive of that too. So wherever you are, support those.
I'll go next. I think for me, embracing healing through policies and practice, I think carries back a little bit with the first question about intentionality, right? Like we need to provide a space of intentionality, but almost, I would say, even accountability in terms of like making sure that we follow through. And so I guess I'm just really excited to see what is going to happen at this conference with the presentations, the pláticas, because that is, that's what we need. It's almost like, given this unfortunate experience many of us have lived through, that it's like we need a new vision, and this is it. And that's how kind of I think about it, with being intentional with policies and really holding institutions accountable. But yeah, I think for me, I'm more like the practical hands when I think of things. So for me, that's what it comes down to. And so I hope that, for other folks, who submitted to this conference or are attending the conference or are first timers, to really see that. I think when we were thinking about this is having a new step forward on wanting to be accountable. And, I think even what kind of Nancy talked a little bit, right? This new vision. So yeah.
I can go. I think for me, the healing through policies and practices is about first bringing light to the different ways that traditional and normative institutional practices create moments where students, staff, and faculty feel othered or are not being seen. And we have to really critically look at those practices, and it makes me think of, the pandemic really kind of showed us and for a lot of, and showed the university a lot of the holes in the ways that they do things, you know, and like how they had to kind of figure out ways to make, you know, really difficult decisions, but also decisions that would impact, you know, faculty, students, and staff. You know, I'm thinking, you know, at my institution, you know, last year, since we were online all year, all the grades, all of the courses that students took were letter grade optional. So students could take all of their courses for pass, no pass. That changed. And so that policy is no longer in place. So in this fall quarter, our students are taking all of their courses back the way they were. And, you know, to Audrey's point, we're coming back from a pandemic. Our students are still experiencing this pandemic. You know, I have students who are from parts of the country where the pandemic is very real and it felt very real for them on a daily basis. So no, we are not back. And yet the university has, you know, in my university in particular, has decided to kind of put that pressure back onto students, you know? And so that's just one example of the different things that we need to be aware of that are really impacting how students and staff and faculty are experiencing this university. We all are going through a healing process, and we have to change the way that we do things in order to make space for the new ways of being, you know, instituting, you know, policies where you can work from home. You know, what is the new hybrid model is going to look like for teaching, if that's going to be something that is going to be with us moving forward. So, I mean, there's different things that the pandemic made us all aware of that we can't not think about anymore. And so we can't go back to an institution that looked very similar to before the pandemic. That no longer exists. You know, we've been dramatically affected by this. And so healing is going to take years. And so I do think that it's important that we start to center that healing, because healing looks like in different ways. I mean, I just can't get over the fact, you know, I have students who have parents who have passed away because of COVID, you know, and they're not really receiving that kind of care. I mean, we've all been impacted by so much of what's happened this last year, and then our institutional practices are not making space for that. And a lot of it is because it's what we know, and we haven't had time to reinvent and rethink what things would look like. But it is something that has to be in the consciousness of high-level administrators, but then also faculty who set the tone for students, and then also all of us who make up the university. We have to take time to think about how these things are affecting us.
Thank you, Rigo. Much appreciated. There's a lot there. You know, certainly feel like I can echo a lot of what's already been shared around healing. That I think it's the that embracing part of it, of the healing, right, that I think speaks to what Rigo was saying, that it is a process that we are engaging in, right? That it's not a particular moment, right? A conference will not heal. A conference may participate in the process of healing, right? And so as we think about what AAHHE can mean for us, and our participation in is this embracing this particular opportunity to embrace healing. You know, I was really struck by what you were saying around this kind of collective trauma that we've experienced, right? You know, and none of it individually. You know, it's a communal endeavor that it would take as we move forward, and trying to sort through what that means to not take on the work on my own, but in community with others, with other, you know, scholars, with other administrators, with families, right? I think there are ways that institutions inherently exclude families, especially from marginalized communities, that we need to think about what are ways of supporting them in addition to our students here on campus. Certainly our students can participating in that, inviting them to share what you've experienced. You know, at Vassar, I keep saying it to folks. I was like, I don't know if we've processed what we just experienced. Much like what he was just sharing, we just jumped back into being a small liberal arts, you know, college where 98% of our students live on campus. We started with a certain amount. 40 students have gone home since then. 40+ students have gone home. We're a campus of 2,400 students. So, you know, that's a percentage of our student body that has decided they cannot be here. It is not healthy for them to be here. One of the things we could be doing in acknowledging some of that harm is I need to look at those numbers. I need to know who those students are that are deciding to make, to head home and not be here. Are they disproportionately students of color? Things like that are things that in terms of reckoning with both this trauma and what this kind of, you know, coming back to normal has meant to our campus is something that we need to reckon with as well. I think kind of beyond the, thinking about practices, one of the things that we've been working through here, and I've always been one to kind of dabble and talk through like cancel culture, but it's very present on campus. And I've been struck by the work of Adrienne Marie Brown more recently, right, as she talks about the possibilities of transformative justice, is that when the response to mistakes, failures, and misunderstandings is emotional, psychological, economic, and physical punishment, we breed a culture of fear, secrecy, and isolation. And again, isolation, right? On top of what we just experienced, right? We're still persisting in this particular practice. So she wonders in a very real way, how do we pivot towards practicing transformative justice? How do we shift from individual, interpersonal, and interorganizational anger towards a viable, generative, sustainable, systemic change, right? Those are the questions that Adrienne Marie Brown asks us to consider. And so for me, as I think about that embracing healing, it also has to do with ways that we can consider the dignity of all members of our community, those that are harmed particularly, and even those that do harm. And I think in a community like AAHHE, where we are coming from different paths, generationally, geographically, right? Those opportunities at a space like a conference or even in our own conversations may, right? There may be some mistakes made. There may be some misunderstandings. And what capacity do we tap into to not dismiss that individual or that group, but rather to invite the conversation and to think about the kind of root causes to the harm that's being done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, y'all. I appreciate that. I think going back to what you all were saying earlier around these institutions weren't meant for us, they weren't built for us, right? So this notion of healing is, I'm so glad it made it into the conference theme, because yes, we have to heal from COVID and the traumas that have been most recently produced, but there's this unresolved traumas that continue to happen, and that these institutions, you know, will place on our students and on ourselves as well, right? And just what it has meant for students not to go home, not to be able to go home when that's a nourishing space because of the fear of COVID and just this intertwining of issues that have come together. And I really appreciate Paul Laborn's comment on it's the opposite of weeding out, right? And so when we talk about practices and policies, how do we move away from training faculty or setting these expectations around you need to earn your seat to be here or to stay here, right? And just make this a nourishing, healing space, not just for the students and community members, but also for faculty and staff and administrators, right? I think that thinking about Dr. Baca, as you were saying things of like everything that you do for students, how do we then ensure that we are not going to burn out, ensure that we are also healing and that we are doing well? I think one practice that I put into place in my ethical leadership courses is requiring students to take one class session for a self-care, like it's an assignment, and you will get 0 points if you don't report back and do it. And it makes students so uncomfortable, and some of them are so mad and annoyed, and I know they are, right? But just most recently having students say, you know, I went and I saw a counselor, and like he's like, I didn't see the points of this assignment, but now I understand it, right? So remembering for ourselves that practices doesn't have to mean at the institutional level, it can also mean for ourselves and prioritizing our well-being also. But Herman, I'll hand off to the last question.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, and I think that to kind of, and I appreciate all the panelists kind of, you know, calling us to task in a lot of ways in terms of both how we're implicated in reimagining but then there was also a lot of conversation within even the committee of, we're done reimagining, right? Like, we've been there and done that. And so there's a call to action in a lot of ways, in both the expectations that we have of our institutions and institutional leaders, but then also ourselves and our responsibility for creating spaces of healing, either as individuals, but also as a collective. And so, yeah, thank you so much. You know, one of the pieces of the conference theme is this kind of justicia con amor y querencia. And so some of the earlier conversations, as we started to grapple with what exactly we wanted to see and needed to see, was through, like, informed, I think, in a lot of ways through Black feminist thought. And bell hooks indicated that love will move us away from domination in all of its forms. In that, like Luis was talking about, right, like the academy and kind of academia as a whole in some ways is empty sometimes of the idea of love, and that striving for querencia, for justice through querencia and love, is that we're moving policies and practices to be more than just coping, but instead to, again, be more about the healing environments that we're creating for ourselves, but then also for others potentially. And so the question is kind of thinking about justice with love and querencia. The committee had a lot of discussions around justice, specifically through love and care, like love and care being vehicles for justice within our communities. And so what does that mean for you? And how do you hope that conference participants, attendees, facilitators, and presenters might engage with those concepts, the concepts of love and care as vehicles for justice?
Well, I would love to see all of the policies that we had over the pandemic, right? The inequities were exacerbated. Students, oh, here's a laptop, but they don't have access to the internet. Students are going to the parking lots to get internet access, and they have to, use the restrooms throughout the day. Like, those are the realities, and are the realities still, because there's campuses still online, that's not justice, right? Like, oh, okay, afterthought, let me give you Wi-Fi. And that happened in the K-12 system as well, right? So I would like to think that justice is looking at those policies and practices that came up and were exposed and are exposed, and even ones that weren't exposed from before the pandemic, to say, well, how can I better serve? I found out that more than 80% of my students don't have access to laptop because they're doing their work on their phones. And I know that, right? Like, they do the work on their phones, you can tell. And part of it is to be able to say, we know what's right. Let's provide them a laptop. Let's provide them internet. Let's provide all these wraparound services that we know exist and do better for our student populations that need them. And to make that policy, and to not balk at it and say, oh, that's too expensive. Because there was a lot of money going out. And now we're in the black. Just depends on where you are, right? But there's money for one-time purchases. And that's something that is important. These grants that went out, I mean, I had one student, she emailed me because I pushed it out to them twice, 3 reminders that there's grants. Grants mean you don't have to pay it back. So my student was emailing me, she's like, thank you so much, I qualified for it, I got $1,000. And it's like, that's what we need and we know works for our students. Now, I don't know what she spent it on, but I will tell you, I lost 3 jobs in this last pandemic. And I got hired at Cal State San Bernardino. So, I mean, I know as much as a student, we've lost people, we've lost jobs, we've lost time, we've lost so much that to say, let's have policies reflect what we know works well for our students, and let's keep those in place. And let's have leaders that support those policies without balking at it and saying why we can't do it. That's what I would love to hear about. And I know we would all love to hear about, because if something good is happening on your campus or in your space or place, AAHHE's the place for us to pick up and learn from each other and to build those spaces in other places, right? So please share.
I can go. I think for me, and I apologize if we start hearing some sound, background noise. You know, I think for me, you know, what I hope the presenters and participants get out of engaging this concept of justicia con amor y querencia is honestly, you know, there's that saying, and I was thinking about this as we were just chatting right now, you know, there's that idea that like, oh, meet me halfway, and like, you know, but I feel like for our intentionality of in creating this theme and the pláticas that we had that were really great, was almost like as if it's not meet me halfway, but rather let's do this together. Let's walk side by side and let's figure it out. And you know, and I remember, you know, with just kind of second guessing the idea of querencia, but I mean, we really need to. I hope, you know, that participants and that are here or will listen to this later is really help contribute to this kind of new vision, new step as we move forward. And so I think that's where I kind of stand in terms of not like, oh, let's meet halfway, but rather like, let's do this together. And yeah, so I think that's what I hope to get for participants to get out of this conference, and even just that Amor y Querencia, because we really, you know, I mean, moving forward, like Rigo said, you know, we're not out of it, and there really isn't anything that's post pandemic. We're in it. So yeah, so I think that for me is first and foremost. And you know, we just, you know, and I think even the term ánimo, right? Like, I think that's another thing that we really need to emphasize as we move forward, and yeah, so thanks.
This one was a harder one for me to kind of think about, because for me, justice through Amor y Querencia is really about showing how is it that our colleges and universities, and how we can push them to be just places for all Latinx students to be able to exist in all of their different Latinidades. For me, justice is about supporting all the ways that students, staff, administrators, and faculty are othered and made invisible in our institutions, and trying to bring life to all of our identities. I think that's just it's again, I go back to how I started around this embodiment. It is an embodied kind of state that we need to kind of cultivate. People need to feel the sense of care from another person. People need to be able to get a sense, you know, that people care about them. I mean, I just think about when I go to any of our cultural centers on campus, I immediately am greeted with a big smile and a hug. You know, that is something that is a constant in all of our kind of community centers that students experience. But we have to make sure that those experiences are not only happening in these very specific cultural silos in many ways, that we have to make sure that these kinds of practices exist all over campus. For me, it's just really about showing a level of care towards each other that we just haven't had. I mean, it's really about trying to understand that, you know, as we come to this work, we all have very different lived experiences. Even before the pandemic, we've all had different lived experiences that have gotten us to this place. And a lot of us come to the university to heal from a lot of these different things that we've experienced. And so for me, it is incredibly important that as we really think about our universities and colleges, that they become places where people can heal in the different ways that institutional structures have oppressed them, whether it was at that institution or the ones before that when they got there, that we recognize, like Nancy was saying, we exist in these structures that were not meant for people that look like us by design, and so we are constantly facing these forms of otherness. And so for me, justicia is recognizing that your experience is different from someone else's, but you understand that at the bottom, at the end of the day, there is something that connects all of us. And so we have to understand that even if we don't understand the difference, that we support people who've had those experiences. We have to make space for the uncomfortness that we feel. For me, it really comes to being a strong ally, for an ally, and if not more, an accomplice when it comes to a lot of these issues. And this is where I start to look at white folks at these institutions, where we need accomplices in order to do this work. I'm thinking because some folks are at predominantly white institutions or white serving institutions. And so good folks exist in those places as well. We call them accomplices, right? Because they're not just folks who are allies and they check off a little thing on Facebook saying that, yeah, I support, these rights, but are actually doing the work. And we need more of those folks that are doing that work. And I think AAHHE is a great place to help us engage in those conversations.
Thank you again. I don't even know how to follow that up, friend. I think similar to where you started was I had a hard time trying to think through this. One of the things that I like when I'm going through kind of hiring processes and trying to figure out who's going to work with me, I ask folks, or I try to discern whether there's a capacity to critically love the institution, right? And I think for me, Justicia con Amor y Querencia, right, is this particular request of love and querencia to be critical observers of the institution, its past, its present, and its direction. And the more that I can surround myself with folks like that, the more hopeful I am about the work that I'm engaged in the communities that we're supporting. Justicia, I think for me is it's a fundamentally a very different set of questions and framework than say diversity work or inclusion work, right? Like Justicia is asking us to consider, right, systemic barriers to access, to engagement, to success across the board. If I had to in the kind of the relationship between those three things, I think Justicia for me is this way in which the academy is transformed by knowledge that comes from us, comes from our families, comes from our abuelas, abuelos, that it is informed at least by the most beautiful and positive aspects of that, because there are parts of my family that are ugly that I gotta reckon with. Then that's a part of it too. But that for me is I think the invitation when we merge those concepts together is this acknowledgement that that the answers, or that the potential answers for the systemic change that we're looking for is going to come from outside of the academy. And it's the institution's capacity to embrace this way of being, this way of knowing together, and outside of it will certainly be an important part of that.
Thank you all so much for that, really great insights and context and perspectives that I think informed, of course, obviously the conversations happening within the conference planning committee, but also, right, ways in which we might situate ourselves beyond just the conference, the AAHHE conference, as actors within these institutions and beyond. And so I really appreciate Luis, your kind of the critical observer pieces, right? Like Amor y Querencia being the critical observers for Justicia. That was great. I appreciate it. And so I know that we're running short on time, but Nancy, any kind of questions that we got from any of the attendees?
Yeah, just thank you all for sharing your thoughts and making time to be present. We did, I think, just to summarize, it's almost like this, I just really am loving the comments. Audrey shared, why do we do away with the supports that we know are better for our students? And surprisingly, we have money when if people are not going to graduate on time and there's this dire need to get everyone to graduate, then the money shows up. And some of these supports that we've known would have been helpful prior to a pandemic show up, right? And Sarah Rivera asking, how can Justicia con Amor y Querencia be normalized at a PWI, WSI? And Sofia Ugarte saying, I'm exhausted of the excuse of lack of funds and fewer staff for treating our students poorly. Being intentional and truly caring is free, right? So thinking about Laura Rendon's work around validation theory and Santi Pensante pedagogy. As I was reading some of these comments and as I was reflecting on what was shared today, I know some of us always say, well, I like being faculty. I'm not an administrator. Administration is not for me, right? But again, as we're calling for these changes to happen, I think this conversation, this plática, really kind of emphasizes the need for individuals who, quote unquote, get it, who are coming out of this from a place of love and with the aim of social justice, right? To step up to these different, sometimes they may feel like, snake pits or something, but to step up in these moments when possible and take these leadership positions on. As we were developing the call, I think we had just approved it and announced a couple of proposals. I shared with Herman, Lucia, and Victor that UC Berkeley had a new chancellor in place, Tania Matos, she's a vice chancellor for equity and inclusion at UC Berkeley. And she emphasized she wants to be at a place where people feel that their humanity is affirmed, right? And so where she wants to lead with love. So just to see these moments of different individuals that are acknowledging the different leaders and activists that we follow, right? We are building on this previous work and these previous movements that have come into place. And now we're in a place where we are able to bring these topics as querencia, healing, love, justicia, and century, making it front and center and making it part of the main focus of what we should be doing and calling to action, right? So I just appreciate everyone on the call and everyone and as our panelists and Herman, Victor, Lucia, I appreciate you all for being present and for doing this work because it is labor, emotional time, all kinds of labor, right? But it's so important. And I hope that we can get more of us to join in the conference. So the conference registration opened this week. This conference will be very different than previous conferences, again, with concerns around finances, around COVID, wanting to keep things safer. We're going to have a smaller conference setting. So registration is going to be basically first come, first serve. There's a capacity of about, I want to say 120 participants, including the 120, 150, including the people who are going to be presenting. So this is where it's important.
Nancy, if I might give you an update on that. Yeah, we have a maximum capacity of 170.
And that's including the board members and
that includes the presenters, and it does not include the board members.
Okay, so it went up.
So it would be 170 plus 20. Yeah, so yeah,
good.
We're good.
All right, and traditionally AAHHE ranges from 300 to 500 individuals. So I think most of us, myself included, will wait till the last minute or pay on spot to figure things out for registration. So that won't be the case in the sense AAHHE registration is open, I believe. Oh yeah, there it is. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you for putting that up. The registration is open for us to log in, and I know funding is an issue, but we tried to make this in a place where we saw it as accessible near Las Vegas, close to Las Vegas, where a lot of flights go in there. And we wanted to make it as long as possible, but also acknowledge that we can't be there the traditional, 4 to 5 days that it's been happening. It will be a hybrid model. So if you can't make it in person, we will be having most of the sessions online as well, streamed, especially the keynote talks. So we are just really excited for the different proposals that were submitted and approved. We're waiting to finalize that schedule and share that with you all. But we are also very excited for the different keynote panelists and panels that have been organized by the committee alongside the board members as well. So I hope that everyone's able to join us either online or in person. Herman, Audrey, Alonso, Rigo, Luis, do any of you all want to add anything before we wrap up?
I just wanted to add, well, thanks for this space, but to your point, Nancy, I do think it's really important that those of the folks who are on this call to think about moving into administrative kind of positions. I was really it was really cool to, in the last year, to kind of see my friends assuming these new positions of, equity, all this equity talk now, right? And so all these folks are kind of starting to move into this, but that is the stepping stone, and we need to be into these spaces. We need more of us that think like this to be in those spaces. They're hungry for it, and so I do encourage that those of us who are on the call who haven't thought about administrative jobs to really think about moving into them, because we really need folks to be able to be in those rooms to impact decision making.
And make sure you beef up your self-care routine when you do that, because we need you to stay in there and collaborate. I think the collaboration is so important, which is something we didn't touch upon, but that's part of what one of the main focuses in the conference. So Lucia, if you want to add anything, or Herman, before we go ahead and wrap up. I know this conversation can keep going, but that's the goal, to continue it at the conference in a couple of months at Nevada State College. So we appreciate them for hosting the conference as well.
Thank you, Nancy. I just want to say thank you very much all for joining. It was a great pleasure having you. There was a wonderful topic and the discussion was extremely nice. I do have a request to please complete the webinar survey. You're going to receive a link right after you click end the meeting. And if you don't have time right now because you're pressed for time, you're also going to receive a link tomorrow. So give us feedback. Thank you so much.
There was a question, since we're still on, I know some folks are logging on, but Lucia, there's a question around, and Victor stepped out, but is this $200 student in-person registration fee negotiable? Are there reduced rates, waivers, or scholarships? I think the student fee, from what I remember, is already reduced, but
it is already.
You all want to, I'll put my email in the chat. If anybody wants to follow up, because it was typed in as anonymous, so I don't know who ask that, and we can figure out if there's options or what we can do, or help you find funding at your institution, because oftentimes the institution might have student level funding that
Yes.
they just don't promote. So I put my email in there in case whoever asked the question is still around and wants to address that later.
Thank you so much, Nancy. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much, and it was great to have you all, and we'll see each other soon. Okay, bye-bye. Take care.